What's up, fight fans? This is Counterpunch with Counterpunch Boxing News, and I have some new news concerning Al Haymon and Deontay, the Bronze Bomber, Wilder. You know, a lot has been going on and buzzing around Wilder and Fury, and a lot of people have been talking about that. You know, you've seen the videos on this channel along with other channels that have been reporting that news of the third fight may or may not be happening, more on the not happening. Okay, but what we're not talking about is the person that allowed that fight not to happen. Okay, one of my videos, I was talking about Al Haymon and how I was really upset with him and how they should have known better, and it just hit me about Al Haymon. Al Haymon is a guy that he's not dumb by far. And it just hit me on why Al Haymon allowed certain things to transpire. A lot of people thought it was Corona season. That helped. Sure, that was a factor. But that wasn't the deciding factor on that fight happening. This is what I believe. I think Al Haymon looked at Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. Okay, and he looked at that and he decided to turn his back on that particular, or on the effort, okay, and decided not to put the effort into that fight by turning his back on Wilder. Let me explain. Al Haymon knew that Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury was targeted. The last was targeted in December, right? Okay. Now the networks came forth and said, "Well, hey, that's bad for sports. It's bad for sports." So they suggested it having it on December 5th. You guys remember that? It's supposed to be on December 19th. And then, of course, you see Bob Arum and Shelley Finkel, all these guys scrambling around to search for a date earlier in December. It couldn't be on the 12th, because what's happening on the 12th? The biggest heavyweight fight of the year, and that's Joshua Pulev. They wouldn't going up against that. They know better than that, because they know damn well that fight, regardless of where it's at, even if it's in London, they're not going to do that, right? So he didn't have that fight, because if he thought that Wilder in Fury 3 was a big enough draw, he would have had that fight on the same night as Joshua Pulev to have a comparison of ratings, because he felt confident enough that that fight would do better than that fight. But they know, and we all know, that it wouldn't, because between Sky Sports and the selected audience of Pulev Joshua, the mandatory fight, that was not going to happen. So Al Haymon made that critical decision. So what did Al Haymon do once he found out that they were targeting that particular fight on the 5th of December? He decided to bump that and give that slot to Errol Spence versus Danny Garcia, because Al Haymon's a businessman and he knows exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly, look, Errol Spence ain't been beat. Errol Spence is the guy that I need to invest in now, not Deontay Wilder. Why? Because Deontay Wilder has lost. And not only did he lose, he lost badly. So he knew there's no guarantee that Deontay Wilder will beat Tyson Fury in the third fight. And he knew that. Al Haymon knew that. That's why Al Haymon said, you know what? I'm washing my hands over. Give that date to Errol Spence versus Danny Garcia. Let's start focusing on promoting that particular fight in a stadium with an audience. Think about it, with an audience. Why couldn't that be Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder? You see what I'm saying? He could have had the power to spring that up, to promote that, to decide that, but he didn't do that, did he? No, he did not. He didn't do that at all, because he already had knew, hey, that's a lost cause, or it's too tricky to put effort or power or energy or money into a third fight. So what he did was he decided, hey, give that to Errol Spence, Danny Garcia. I'm no longer worried about Deontay Wilder. He knew about the contract. Al Haymon knew about the contract. If anybody was going to know about the contract, it would have been him. Think about what I'm saying, people. Al Haymon knew. That's why Al Haymon was like, you know what? Let it go. You don't hear anything else about Al Haymon, but we know what Al Haymon allowed to be done. He took that spot from Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury for a reason, because he knew what the possible outcome could have been. He knew that Deontay Wilder, since he took that L, his stock has dropped. He knows that. That's what advisors, promoters, managers do. Okay? Hell, he's like a he's like a emperor over there. And he knows exactly what he did. So before people start wagging the finger at all these other guys that have less power than Al Haymon, you have to look at Al Haymon himself. Because Al Haymon himself knew exactly what the repercussions were when he seen that shit in the contract. You think Al Haymon didn't see that small ass window contract obligation rematch clause? Do you think he didn't see that shit? He saw that shit. And he looked at it and was like, you know what? Cool. But he also knew, excuse me, he also knew at the time when Deontay Wilder got beat and those dates started changing, the less and less he cared about making that third fight. So, the management of Deontay Wilder, they're not the best. I never said they were. But I will say this. Al Haymon, at the end of the day, allowed that to happen. He allowed it to happen. He allowed it to happen because he no longer cared as much about that fight being made. That's why it's not made. But anyway, you guys tell me what you think of Al Haymon and his decision to book Errol Spence and Danny Garcia on December 5th rather than Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 3. Of course, please subscribe, and you guys been Counterpunch. Peace.